Guarantee you no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
It is 3 o'clock on this Wednesday afternoon rather. You're watching the briefing here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey, and coming up over the next hour, we've got all the latest political news and analysis, including the Prime Minister at PMQ saying he is not going to resign in a pretty angry confrontation with Keir Starmer, who's demanding the full publication of Sue Gray's report. That report, we, MPs and everyone else waiting with bated breath on. Could it come today or indeed tomorrow? Also, further controversy for the Prime Minister this afternoon, as suggestions that he may well have authorised the Afghan evacuation of animals, something he's previously dismissed. And in addition to that, we'll be speaking to someone who used to speak on behalf of Vladimir Putin about what precisely Russia's up to on the Ukrainian border. Could we be seeing war yet again in Europe? That and so much more in the next hour. Do get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. Stay with us between 3 and 4. But first, at the top of the hour, is the very latest news with Rosie Wright in the studio.
Good afternoon. It's just gone 1 minute past 3. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date in the GB News newsroom. The Prime Minister's spokesperson has confirmed Number 10 still hasn't received the Sue Gray report into alleged parties at Downing Street during lockdown. The Labour Party is demanding that the report be published in full after Cabinet Ministers suggested the findings may be redacted for security reasons. Well, during Prime Minister's questions, Sir Keir Starmer accused Boris Johnson of misleading Parliament and called for his resignation. He also says the police are investigating the most serious and flagrant type of breach in the rules.
On the 8th of December, he told this House, "I will place a copy of the report in the library of the House of Commons." His spokesperson has repeatedly stated that means the full report, not parts of the report, not a summary of the report, not an edited copy. So can the Prime Minister confirm that he will publish the full Sue Gray report as he receives it?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, what I can tell him is that we've got to leave the report to the independent investigator, as he knows, and of course, when I receive it, I will do exactly what I said.
European diplomats are working to ease tension between Russia and Ukraine during talks today in Paris. Moscow has currently amassed around 100,000 troops on the border with Ukraine and has sent more fighter jets to Belarus, where it's been holding military drills. The Foreign Secretary said the government is not ruling anything out when it comes to the UK imposing personal sanctions against President Putin if he invades Ukraine. Well, Russia expert Keir Giles told us Ukraine faces the possibility of air and missile strikes from Russia.
Even if it's not a land invasion, let's look at how Russia gets its way in military conflicts, as we've seen in, for example, Syria. They think that terrorizing the civilian population by bombarding them with air and missile strikes is a good way to win a war. So that is the kind of threat that Ukraine is actually now facing, and it's a real one because Russia does have both the capability and they've shown the will to do it.
New evidence indicates the Prime Minister personally authorised the evacuation of animals from Afghanistan, despite previous denials. Well, the former Marine, Pen Farthing, who ran a shelter in Kabul, campaigned to get his team out of the country last summer. An email published by the Foreign Affairs Committee now reveals the government sponsored clearance for the charter flight. During an interview in December last year, Boris Johnson was asked if he'd authorised the evacuation, and he denied the claim.
No, that's complete nonsense, but what I can tell you is that I think that the operation of pitting to airlift 15,000 people out of Kabul in the way that we did over the summer was one of the outstanding military achievements of the last 50 years or more.
A woman's been arrested on suspicion of murder after the death of a 5-year-old boy in Coventry. The child was found with serious injuries at a property in Earlsdon yesterday afternoon. His death was confirmed at the scene. Now, police say the woman arrested is not the boy's mother.
We were called to the Earlsdon area of Coventry, and when we arrived, found a young boy who was just short of his 6th birthday with multiple injuries. Despite the extensive efforts of police officers and paramedics, unfortunately, nothing could be done to save him. We have arrested a 49-year-old woman. She is known to the family, and I would like to stress it is not the boy's mother.
More than 1,300 reports of spiking by injection have been made to UK police forces in less than 6 months. The National Police Chiefs Council have told MPs there have been 1,382 complaints of such crimes since September. The Home Affairs Committee heard the ideal ask would be for a specific offence to be created for spiking. Now, from Friday, people in Wales who test positive for coronavirus will be able to finish self-isolating after 5 full days instead of 7. They'll still need to produce 2 negative lateral flow tests, though, taken on days 5 and 6. And in Northern Ireland, vaccine passports have been scrapped for hospitality venues and cinemas. Nightclubs are also allowed to reopen for the first time since Boxing Day, along with the return of indoor standing events. Proof of jabs, though, will still be required to go to nightclubs or large events. You are now up to date here on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's go back to Westminster for the briefing with Darren.
Yeah, very good afternoon. Welcome to the briefing here on GB News. It is 6 minutes past 3 o'clock. We're live from Westminster on TV, online and on your DAB radio. Thank you for your company. Going to begin, of course, with Prime Minister's Question Time. A pretty rowdy affair again in the Commons this afternoon between Keir Starmer and the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister insisting that he is not going to go anywhere in defending the government's records. A very deliberate attempt by the Prime Minister to go on the attack. Keir Starmer, though, insisting that the Prime Minister broke rules and that he wants to see Sue Gray's investigation in full published to not just the Labour opposition, but to all MPs and to the public. We await, of course, that report. Downing Street this afternoon saying they have still not yet received it. But the Speaker of the House says that he is willing to extend Parliament's hours, essentially, potentially this evening, so that the Prime Minister can come to the Commons as soon as the report is published, make a statement and take questions from MPs. Of course, there is a separate investigation, as we know, launched by the Metropolitan Police yesterday. So politics remains on a knife edge. MPs await that report. But a PMQs Partygate, or so-called Partygate, continued to dominate. Let's look back at some of the best highlights.
On the 8th of December, the Prime Minister told this House, "I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged there was no party." So since he acknowledges the ministerial code applies to him, will he now resign?
No, Mr. Speaker. But you know, since he asks about COVID restrictions, let me just remind the House, and indeed remind the country, that he has been relentlessly opportunistic throughout. He has flip-flopped from one side to the other. He would have kept us in lockdown in the summer, Mr. Speaker. He would have taken us back into lockdown at Christmas, Mr. Speaker. And it's precisely because we didn't listen to Captain Hindsight that we have the fastest growing economy in the G7, Mr. Speaker. And we have got all the big calls right.
Mr. Speaker, having got the material from Sue Gray, the police had to take a decision as to whether what they had before them was the most serious and flagrant types of breach of the rules. If members want to laugh at that, laugh. The police spelt out what they meant. They decided on the material they've already got that they've already got that those involved knew or ought to have known what they were doing was an offence, and that there was little ambiguity around the absence of any reasonable defence. Does the Prime Minister really not understand the damage his behaviour is doing to our country?
That the right honourable gentleman understands that although the issue that he raises is important, there is simply no way, as he knows, as a lawyer, that I can comment on the investigation that he is currently taking place. But what he also knows, he talks about the most serious issue. He talks about the most serious issue before the public today and before the world today. It's almost as though he was in ignorance of the fact, Mr. Speaker, that we have a crisis on the borders of Ukraine, and I can tell him what is going on in the cabinet room of this country is that the UK government, no, Mr. Speaker, the UK government is bringing the West together so that we have, led by this government and this Prime Minister and our Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary, to bring the West together to have the toughest possible package of sanctions to deter President Putin from what I think would be a reckless and a catastrophic invasion. That is what this government is doing. We're getting on with the job, and I think he needs to raise his game, frankly.
The Prime Minister went into hiding for 5 days because of these allegations. Talk to me about being around for the allegations. Mr. Speaker.
Can I just say I don't want to do this, but I am determined to make sure our constituents can hear. The next person that stops me hearing will not be continuing in this debate. Questions?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's continual defences wait for the Sue Gray report. On the 8th of December, he told this House, "I will place a copy of the report in the library of the House of Commons." His spokesperson has repeatedly stated that means the full report, not parts of the report, not a summary of the report, not an edited copy. So can the Prime Minister confirm that he will publish the full Sue Gray report as he receives it?
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell him is that we've got to leave the report to the independent investigator, as he knows, and of course, when I receive it, I will do exactly what I said. But I can tell him that in the meantime, I think what the people of this country want to hear is what we're doing to tackle the issues that matter to all of us, fixing the cost of living, Mr. Speaker, helping people across the country by lifting the living wage, Mr. Speaker, by helping people with their fuel costs, Mr. Speaker, as this government is, and by cutting the tax of people on universal credit, cutting the tax by £1,000. And, Mr. Speaker, that party opposite are committed to abolishing universal credit. That's their policy.
There you go. That was the Prime Minister speaking earlier on, accusing Keir Starmer of being a lawyer, not a leader. We also heard, of course, Keir Starmer accusing the Prime Minister of being a liar, not a leader. Well, let's get more on this and speak to Fabian Hamilton. He is the Labour MP for Leeds North East and joins us from the studio. Very good afternoon to you, Fabian. Just first of all, on that attack line from Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister's got a point, hasn't he, in that there are really quite important issues going on, not just in this country, around the world, and yet every PMQs for, well, the last 3-4 weeks, Keir Starmer hasn't asked any questions about Ukraine or about the cost of living crisis. It's all been on this issue of these alleged parties.
Well, it's very interesting, isn't it, that until now, the Prime Minister hasn't been that interested in Ukraine or the cost of living, which he's actually responsible for increasing. The fact is that politics is actually about trust. It's about whether the people we elect to represent us are people we can trust to do the right thing in our interests. And that's why this is so fundamental. I think we're all fed up with hearing about parties and lockdown breaking, but these people in Downing Street and his government set the rules. And everybody obeyed those rules with some tragic consequences, except the people who made them. That's why this is important. We need to restore trust in our elected leaders. Otherwise, our democracy will fail. And frankly, when Boris Johnson was Foreign Secretary, he didn't show a lot of interest in the conflicts in Yemen and Syria at the time, conflicts that were very, very serious and had consequences for this country too. And I think the reason he's now so obsessed with Ukraine is not because he's interested in the plight of the Ukrainian people, but actually because he's trying to divert attention from his own misdeeds and wrongdoings. It's absolutely typical, it's scandalous, it must stop, he must resign.
We're waiting, of course, Sue Gray's report, aren't we? What if Sue Gray's report doesn't lay blame at the Prime Minister's door? She may well blame members of his staff for what went on, but not him particularly. And in those circumstances, if he's kind of slightly exonerated by Sue Gray, surely you won't then still be calling for him to resign. So, I mean, as I say, you're jumping the gun a little bit here, aren't you?
No, I don't think I'm jumping the gun. Look, the public are intelligent enough to make their own minds up from the evidence that's been presented to them. Keir Starmer said, he quoted the Prime Minister in December.
The point is we haven't seen that evidence yet, though. That's the point.
The evidence
that's why it's a perfectly valid argument to say let's wait for the investigation before jumping to conclusions.
They're hiding behind Sue Gray. The fact is that so many bits of evidence have trickled out. Photographs of that now infamous gathering in the garden of Downing Street when everybody else was locked down, emails, WhatsApp calls, texts, messages. There's plenty of evidence to show that, on the one hand, Boris Johnson was saying, you've got to obey the rules, and on the other hand, he was complicit with his staff in breaking those rules. And I think the thing that sums it up for me above everything else is actually Her Majesty the Queen sitting on her own at the funeral of her husband, Philip, whilst the night before the Prime Minister, or his staff rather, were partying. They are all complicit in this, and we all know that. The very things that people loved about Boris Johnson when they voted for the Conservatives and put him in as Prime Minister with a big majority in December 2019, are now the things they've come to hate about him. So I think the public knows. They don't need Sue Gray to tell them.
Just while we've got you, Fabian, what's your reaction also to this story that's developed this afternoon? The Prime Minister, now this is according to leaked emails, something Downing Street aren't able to comment on so far, that he may well have authorised the evacuation of animals during the fall of Kabul. It was pretty controversial at the time. The Prime Minister denied that he got involved in it, but this leaked email from the Foreign Affairs Select Committee seems to suggest otherwise.
Well, should we be surprised? We are told one thing. He tells us one thing. He absolutely categorically denies he's been involved in this or had any role in it. And then we find that the opposite is true. And I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee myself for 10 years, from 2001 to 2010, and I know the source of its information is extremely good and very reliable. So the fact is, once again, Boris Johnson has said one thing to us and to the media, to the public, whilst doing the complete opposite. It is absolutely typical. People understand this. They've got to know what he's like. That's why he has to go.
OK, Fabian, thank you very much indeed for your time. That's Fabian Hamilton, who is the Labour MP for Leeds North East, joined us there from the studio. Just to expand on that story we're just talking about there, which is these allegations against, against the Prime Minister, that he may well have been involved in the evacuation of animals from Afghanistan, in that he authorised it personally. That seems to have come from an email which has been leaked from the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. It's been gathering evidence, of course, on the fall of Kabul back in the summer. Now, at the time when the Prime Minister was asked whether he had personally intervened in all of this, he said it was complete nonsense. This email seems to give the impression that is not the case. Let's get more details now on all of this and join Mark White, our Home Affairs and Security Editor, is also in the studio for us this afternoon. Mark, just flesh out some further details if you can.
Yeah, so we'll take you back to that airlift to evacuate thousands of people from Afghanistan in August of last year. Now, at the height of the evacuation, Penn Farthing, this ex-Royal Marine, was very anxious, understandably, to get his staff and animals out from that charity that he ran in Afghanistan as well, get them to a place of safety, and he lobbied to try to do that. He managed to charter an aircraft that was paid for by donation, so this was not an aircraft that was going to be used to evacuate people as such from Afghanistan, that according to Penn Farthing. He did then manage to get those members of staff and those animals evacuated. Now, according to the Ministry of Defence, this was right at the end of the airlift operations to take Afghanistan civilians and British nationals out of Kabul. It did not impact on the ability to take those Afghan nationals and the British citizens out of Kabul. But according to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, who've been carrying out their own investigation into this and relying on the words of a whistleblower who has said that actually there was an impact here, that what was going on in terms of the operation to take these animals out meant that resources, military resources, were for a while being devoted to trying to clear the way for that flight and those animals onto that flight, even if it was a privately chartered flight. And those military resources could have been diverted and better used to help with the last of the civilians, Afghans and British nationals, getting out of Kabul. So that was the backstory to that. Today it has been knocked on because of this leaked emails that the Foreign Affairs Select Committee say now shows that the Prime Minister did sanction the evacuation or the use of those military resources to help Pen Farthing in the evacuation of those animals and staff. This email purports to come from a member of staff in the offices of Lord Goldsmith, a foreign minister attached to the environment. Lord Goldsmith, according to this email, as I say, that was sent to someone in the Foreign Office, asking for the use of another charity, or at least paving the way for another animal charity to get same kind of preferential treatment that Pen Farthing got, had suggested in that email that the Prime Minister had sanctioned the use of military personnel to help Pen Farthing out, and that this charity, it was hoped, could get that same kind of help and resource at Kabul airport.
Okay.
Now, doubling down on their denials today, the Defence Secretary has just come out. Ben Wallace has said no way did the Prime Minister at any point sanction the use of any kind of personnel to get Pen Farthing out. This was nothing that the Prime Minister did himself. He was not involved in any way. And the Downing Street official spokesman has also said this afternoon that it remains the case that the Prime Minister wasn't involved in any of the decision-making over the evacuation of Pen Farthing staff and those animals. It's very complicated, this. It really is.
Yeah, indeed, and causing a right political stink.
Yeah, I mean,
here at Westminster.
Yeah, as I say, what Labour say is that it goes again to this question of Boris Johnson's honesty. Was he telling the truth at the time? Well, according to Ben Wallace and Downing Street, they are doubling down and saying, yes, he was telling the truth.
OK, Mark, appreciates it. Mark White there, our Home Affairs and Security Editor, joining us from the studio with the latest on that story. We're going to pause here on the briefing on GB News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we're going to be joined by the former spokesperson of Vladimir Putin, who'll be explaining what precisely the Russian president is up to in Ukraine. That and much more in just a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Very welcome back to the briefing here on GB News. It is 25 minutes past 3 o'clock. Thank you for your company on this Wednesday afternoon. Let's now get more on politics and what's happening with the Sue Gray report as we all await its publication. Trevor Kavanagh is a journalist and political commentator and joins us down the line. Good afternoon to you, Trevor. What's your assessment of where we're at in terms of the Prime Minister's position today? Is it very much going to be D-Day when that report comes out for lots of MPs on the Prime Minister's future?
Yes, I think so. I think that we've all been in a state of sort of suspended animation over the fate of Boris, and it all depends on Sue Gray. That is due sometime today, possibly this evening, and the Speaker of the House of Commons has even offered to extend the sitting if necessary so that MPs can debate it. It depends almost entirely on what she has to say, where she points the finger of blame, who is at fault, and whether it's the Prime Minister or his staff. I think that Boris is actually clinging on literally by his fingernails now, and almost anything that is in this report that gives traction to the idea that he misled Parliament or indeed actually lied to Parliament, I think will make it very difficult indeed for him to survive. And the added extra information from this leaked email from the Defence Select Committee about the airlift of a plane load of mangy cats and dogs, many of whom had to be destroyed on arrival back in Britain, at the expense, it seems to me, and I think to an awful lot of other people, of desperate people trying to get out of Kabul at that time. I think that will be very difficult for him to dodge.
So ultimately, in the end, this, of course, Trevor, is going to be up to Conservative MPs, isn't it? The Prime Minister's, or this kind of controversy has ebbed and flowed, hasn't it, to a large degree? But just give us a sense of where you think the mood of the party is. I know you say everyone's waiting for the report, but what's the mood amongst Conservative MPs?
Well, unless there's some sort of miraculous escape hole in this report, I think the mood is already settled. And I think it's not just MPs, it's the members of the public. And the mailbags, the conversations in the constituencies when members of Parliament go home at weekends, it's the atmosphere out there that's going to make the difference, and whether or not Boris stays on as Prime Minister. I think that the mood of the nation, according to polls so far, is that decision's already been made, that trust has evaporated in this government and in the Prime Minister in particular, which is, of course, very damaging not just for the government and the nation, which is bad enough, but for the Tory party itself in the run-up to, for instance, the local elections, but in the not-too-distant future in the general election.
You've, Trevor, been around, I think it's fair to say, for a while covering Westminster politics. What did you make of Jacob Rees-Mogg's claim this morning that if Tory MPs did get rid of Boris Johnson, it would have to lead to a general election?
No, I don't see that. This government has an 80-seat majority, whoever is Prime Minister in the coming weeks and months, and there's absolutely no reason why it should suddenly call an election. I think that would be electoral suicide, for one thing. And of course, that would nobody would be calling for that except for the beneficiaries, which is the Labour Party and the opposition parties.
And just very finally, you say you can see a escape pod for the Prime Minister. I mean, is there any way he can hold on? Is there a path, essentially, for him, not just staying in power, but even potentially recovering from all of this?
Well, I think that they've got to get on the front foot in some way, and the hope of salvation must be that Sue Gray will blame officials and staff for the shortcomings in the period of the lockdown. There will also be some understanding, perhaps, of the pressures that were on Downing Street at that time. I mean, there's no getting away from the fact that the laws were made in Downing Street. They were harsh and draconian laws, and in the eyes of many, over the top. But people, by and large, stuck with them at, in some cases, quite considerable personal distress. But if you just cut them a little bit of rope, the Downing Street is a factory, which is a hive of industry, and at that particular time, in mid-pandemic, would have been working round the clock to try and sort out measures which would ameliorate the pandemic and get vaccines out, PPE. I mean, it would have been absolutely pandemonium in there. They would have been working 10 to 12-hour days and maybe longer, sleeping in the office and so on. It would have been perfectly understandable in what would have been then a working environment, including the garden, because it was a warm period and people were recommended to work outdoors, whether working from home or in the office. It would have been perfectly understandable for them to spill out into the garden and perhaps even to have a drink. The trouble is that picture hasn't been put forward in any convincing way. And I think people have made up their mind that they're all in there all day long drinking and eating cake. I don't think that was the case, and that's one of the risks that Boris and his team now faces.
OK, Trevor, appreciate your time and your analysis. As always, Trevor Kavanagh there joining us down the line to talk about the Prime Minister as we await that report. And of course, as soon as it is released, we'll have full coverage of it here on GB News. Someone tweeting me this afternoon saying that we have only a Labour MP on to discuss Prime Minister's Question Time. It must be said, is as always, we try and get lots of Conservative MPs on this programme. Frankly, at the moment, it's quite difficult. Lots are not willing to come on. Maybe surprisingly, unsurprisingly. Let us know what you think, though. gbviews at gbnews.uk. That's it for this half of the programme. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes with the latest on the Russia-Ukraine situation. But first, let's head back to the studio now at just after 3:30 for the very latest news with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon. It is 3:32. I'm Rosie Wright to keep you up to date. The Prime Minister's spokesperson has confirmed Number 10 hasn't received the Sue Gray report into alleged parties at Downing Street during lockdown and doesn't know if the inquiry has yet been completed. Well, the Labour Party is demanding the report be published in full after Cabinet Ministers previously suggested the findings may be redacted for security reasons. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace denies Boris Johnson directed him to evacuate Penfarthing or his animals from Afghanistan. It's after an email was released by the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, which appears to show the Prime Minister approved a charter flight for the former Marine. Penfarthing, who ran an animal shelter in Kabul, campaigned to get his team and his pets out of the country when the Taliban seized control in August. The rescue effort led to allegations that animals had been prioritised over people. European diplomats are trying to ease tensions between Russia and Ukraine during talks in Paris. Well, Moscow has currently amassed around 100,000 troops on its border with Ukraine, has sent more fighter jets to Belarus, where it's been holding military drills. The Foreign Secretary said the government is not ruling anything out when it comes to the UK imposing personal sanctions against President Putin if he invades. Police say a woman who was arrested on suspicion of murder after the death of a 5-year-old boy in Coventry is known to the family but is not the child's mother. The boy was found with serious injuries at a property in Earlston yesterday afternoon. He was confirmed dead at the scene. Now, from Friday, people who test positive for coronavirus in Wales will be able to finish self-isolating after 5 full days instead of 7. They'll still, though, need to produce 2 negative lateral flow tests taken on days 5 and 6. In Northern Ireland, vaccine passports have been scrapped in pubs and restaurants from today, and nightclubs are now allowed to reopen for the first time since Boxing Day. You're up to date here on GB News, but on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. We'll keep you up to date across the rest of the afternoon. After a short break, it's back to Westminster for the briefing with Darren.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
A very good afternoon. Welcome back to the briefing. It is 23 minutes to 4 o'clock. Thank you for your company. We're live here in Westminster. Lots of you getting in touch. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Bob says, has it not occurred to you that this is a vendetta against our Prime Minister? It's designed to weaken the British government, and it suits Russia and China in particular, and even the EU. Alan says, I live in Leeds, and very, very few care about the parties. Labour need to concentrate on their own, allowing convicted criminals to continue to be an MP. And Ian says, I'm no Tory, but these Labour MPs are boring. The world's potentially on the verge of war, and they're banging on about the Queen being alone at her husband's funeral as a reason for the Prime Minister to resign. Give me strength. Get in touch. gbviews at gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet us if you want. Let's speak to Alistair Carmichael. He's a Lib Dem MP and joined us down the line. Alistair, very good afternoon to you. Lots of people there are telling us they don't care, and we heard this, didn't we, from Conservatives yesterday, saying people have lost all sense of proportion and perspective on this. That ultimately, you know, having cake in the cabinet room is not really a resigning matter, that people need to kind of concentrate on the far bigger political issues facing the country.
If that were all it was about, then they would have a point. But actually, the real point in all this is about the ability to trust the Prime Minister. And, that's why this matters, because as you say, Darren, there are some massive issues coming down the line. We have issues at home around how we will rebuild the economy as we come out of the COVID pandemic. And we've got a gathering storm to the east with Russia and Ukraine. And, if you just sort of stop for a second and imagine that it was you or one of your family who was possibly looking at being put in harm's way in that particular conflict, wouldn't you want to know that you were being put there by a prime minister in whom you could have confidence and whom you could trust? That's why these things matter. And I get the fact that this has been going on for a very long time. It has gone on for a very long time, though, because Boris Johnson, at every step and every turn, has had to have things dragged from him. We could have left this behind us before Christmas if he had just been prepared to say, we made mistakes, this is what we did. And I'll tell you, he could have had things out in the public domain without having to commission reports and all the rest of it, but he chose not to do that. And as a consequence, we are now in this situation as a result of his own making.
In saying that, you and your colleagues have asked for the Prime Minister, or essentially said the Prime Minister should resign in all of this, and yet and I was saying this to a Labour MP earlier on, we don't have the findings of those investigations. It is entirely plausible that Sue Gray does not lay any blame directly at the Prime Minister. She may do it members of his staff, but not at him. There's no suggestion he organised any of these parties, and so in that respect, it is possible that Sue Gray might exonerate Boris Johnson, making your position potentially a bit silly, no?
Look, it's possible that Sue Gray might exonerate. I think it's very unlikely. It's possible that she will lay blame at his door. I think more likely she will present the facts as she has found. And I think the most significant finding or the most significant development of this in recent days is the passing of this information to the Metropolitan Police, because the taste for that to be done was a very high one, and the fact that it would appear that she has feels that taste has been met, I think, is significant. And, remember, this is not just about whether or not Boris Johnson organised the parties. It's about the fact that he was clearly aware of them, that on occasions he seems to have been part of them. And when you're at the top, especially when you're at the top, at a time like this and at a time like these things were happening, then you have to accept responsibility and you have to accept that the buck stops with you. So, I don't think that our judgment in calling for the Prime Minister to resign is pinned on whatever Sue Gray finds or what she puts in her report. I think it's there for everybody to see from the Prime Minister's own admissions. I keep seeing these references to alleged parties. They're admitted parties. The Prime Minister himself has told us that. OK,
Alistair Carmichael, appreciate your thoughts and your time. Thank you very much indeed. That's Alistair Carmichael there, Lib Dem MP, joining us down the line. But let's move on now to a different story, and that is the worrying situation, of course, on the Ukrainian border with Russian troops continue to amass there. We know that Western leaders have been talking on the telephone this week to try and see what can be done to potentially prevent war in Europe in 2022. Suggestions from the United States today that they may well sanction Vladimir Putin himself if he goes ahead with an incursion or invasion into Ukraine. Well, let's speak now to Thomas Sparrow. He is a journalist based in Berlin and get the view from Germany on all of this. First of all, Thomas, just kind of set out why, at least from where we are here in London, that Germany doesn't seem to have been as vocal or as forthright as other European nations in talking about the potential consequences for Russia and for Vladimir Putin if they do go ahead with an invasion.
Well, Germany has indeed, at least the government, strengthened its position in the last few days. That's something that most observers here agree. But it's also important to stress that Germany's position is seen as problematic. It's a controversial position that has to do, on the one hand, with Germany's close economic ties to Russia, in particular the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which links Russia to Germany. It's waiting for regulatory approval. German officials have for a long time stressed that that is mostly an economic project, and they don't see it as politically as some of Germany's allies that view it from a very different perspective. The US or Poland stressing that Nord Stream 2 is actually a big problem that gives too much power to Russia. That's one reason. The second reason where Germany's position differs compared to some of its political allies is when it comes to sending defensive weapons to Ukraine. Some of Germany's allies, like the UK or the US, have sent weapons to Ukraine, but German officials have been very reluctant to do so, stressing that sending weapons, that those deliveries could actually make negotiations more difficult and could actually make things even more complicated. Germany's focus has been first and foremost on diplomacy, and that's one reason why, for example, now there are talks in Paris where German officials are also attending alongside French officials, Russian officials, and Ukrainian officials to see if diplomatically you can try and de-escalate the situation.
But in saying that, Thomas, there's historical reasons here, potentially, why Germany views Russia differently, doesn't it, from its neighbour Poland, from us in the UK. Just explain to that why there does seem to be this political difference. For example, we know former chancellors have gone off on to work for German companies. Sorry, for Russian companies.
Russian companies, and we're talking here in particular of Gerhard Schröder, who does indeed work for a Russian company, and that to a large extent explains a view in Germany. I wouldn't say it's the majority view, but it is certainly a view that Germany should have stable, at least economic relations with Russia. That explains this issue of Nord Stream 2 as well, this pipeline, which, as I stressed, is viewed here mostly as an economic project. Angela Merkel, the former chancellor, certainly saw that mostly as an economic project, although she also did understand some of the political components that came with it. In fact, now the new German government has indeed agreed with the United States on specific elements on Nord Stream. But in general, the issue of Russia and what relations to have with Russia is a very controversial one in Germany. There are very different perspectives on this, and we saw one, for example, only a few days ago, where the Navy chief, the German Navy chief, stressed that Russia's President Vladimir Putin deserved respect. That was one of various comments that ultimately led to his resignation, and to the Ukrainian ambassador stressing that those comments actually called into question Germany's trustworthiness. So that gives you an idea of just how controversial the whole situation is here in Germany.
And just very finally, Thomas, on all this, clearly one of the things that Russia's looking at are kind of splits in the Western alliance. And it's fair to say, isn't it, when it comes to the EU and foreign policy, it is quite difficult to have a kind of EU-wide foreign policy because of the differences, particularly in some of the big EU nations, when it comes to big foreign policy issues like Russia, for example.
And this has to do not only with historical issues, but also with geographical and with political issues as well. So each country has obviously certain priorities when it comes to very important issues, like the one we're seeing now in Ukraine, Russia. So you have a very different view coming from the Baltic states or coming from Poland than the view that you have, for example, from Spain or from Portugal, or even the view here from Germany, where you consider these two elements that I stressed, the fact that Germany has these very tight economic links to Russia with Nord Stream 2, or the fact that Germany, unlike other countries, has refused so far to send defensive weapons to Ukraine. It is a very difficult challenge here, but not only in this case, to try and have a common position on a European level. And that is one of the main challenges that European leaders have to try and have now, a common response if Russia takes another step in the wrong direction when it comes to this very difficult situation between Russia and Ukraine.
Thomas, as always, appreciate your time. Thomas Sparrow there, who is journalist based in Berlin with the latest on the view from there. Well, let's get now the view from Moscow and join Sergei Markov. He is the former spokesperson for President Vladimir Putin and joins us from the Russian capital. Thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. Just explain to us why there's 100,000 Russian troops on the borders of Ukraine, essentially circling the country. What's the necessity for that?
It's the reason of Russian big military groups nearby the Ukraine border. It's very easily. Russia ready to give strong response to the possible attack of the huge Ukrainian army, which now on the border of Donbass. It's number one. And secondly, because Kiev repressive regime don't want to respect Minsk agreement and to implement Minsk agreement to reality. Every night, Ukrainian neo-Nazi groups making sharing of the Donbas cities. I myself, a couple of times, been on the conference in Donetsk, and I myself wake up deep night because of sharing of the suburbs of Donetsk by Ukrainian mostly neo-Nazi groups. And Russia insisting, either you implement Minsk agreement or we will protect Donbas people ourselves. And to be sure that that Russia will protect them, Russian army exists on the territory. Mostly specifically, Russia, I think, more realistically will recognize Donetsk People Republic and Lugansk People Republic, this anti-fascist republic who uprisal against neo-Nazi repressive junta in 2014. And if the junta will give the order to start the attack against Donetsk and Lugansk, Russian army will be ready first to protect them, then to crush Ukrainian army. By the way, I think that more than half of the Ukrainian soldiers and officers will take Russian side after a few days of the clashes. And then probably Russia will be ready to liberate Odessa, Kharkov, Nikolaev, Zaporozhye, and another cities on the eastern and western part, eastern and southern part of Ukraine, where majority of the people will vote same as Crimea. It means predominant majority will prefer to join Russia.
There's a whole list of things that you've gone through there, but one of the ones that Vladimir Putin has talked about is essentially that he does not want to see Ukraine join NATO. Why shouldn't Ukraine, as a sovereign country, be able to join NATO if it wants? Who are you to tell it can't join NATO?
First of all, NATO is an aggressive alliance which is pushing more to our borders. Secondly, we have a history of the aggressive big alliance.
Sorry, just to correct you on that, it's a defensive alliance. It's a defensive alliance of which countries voluntarily sign up to.
You know, you don't trust yourself, I'm sorry. It's defensive for you, but for us, it's aggressive. And we have, again, the history.
When was the last time NATO invaded a country?
You want to listen to my questions or you want to interrupt me? Sorry. And
you carry on.
We have two history cases. One, big military coalition led by Napoleon Bonaparte, stepping more and more close to Moscow, and finally they attacked the war. Second issue, another coalition headed by Adolf Hitler, stepping more and more close to Russia, and finally they started the war. For you, it looks absolutely strange. It's absolutely impossible. Any comparison of NATO with Napoleon Bonaparte and Adolf Hitler. But from Moscow point of view, from structural point of view, it's also big united Europe with a lot of weaponry and coming more and more close to us. It's the first point. Another point, very important, we don't regard Ukraine as a independent country because United States kill independence of Ukraine. United States imposed puppet regime to Ukrainian people. And I want to ask everybody, not you just moderator, but ask everybody. Native language of 80% of the people in Ukraine, Russian language. Do you believe that people can voluntarily to support prohibition of their native language? Of course not. And prohibition of Russian language in Ukraine, it's exactly very good and simple example, which everybody could see that Ukraine has no independent democratic government. Ukraine have a repressive regime, which mostly controlled by outside players. This is we don't like.
Okay. Just very finally on this, though, I mean, essentially, can Russia afford this potential war? I mean, its economy is already in a terrible state. You've got depopulation, the population falling in Russia. I mean, and there's talk about further sanctions that will hit not just potentially the politicians in Russia, including the president, but also ordinary people who are seeing their living standards fall. Can Russia afford this war?
First of all, you can imagine if territory with 20 million of people will join Russia, of course it will be very good for Russian economy. Big economy, better results. Secondly, if we will stop possible big war, which will have in future by doing some actions and making some kind of security zone for us. Of course, it's good for security. Because it's good for security, it could be good for economy. And thirdly, as I understand, everybody who watches us can see, understand very well, this sanction against Putin, not because Putin doing something wrong, it's because Putin doing this independent from Washington. It's sanctioned not because we're doing something or not doing. It's sanctioned because we exist as big independent country. But please accept this. Russia will be a big independent country.
Thank you very much indeed. We're going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time, but very appreciate your time this afternoon. That's so great. Markov, who is joining us from Moscow with very assertively putting forward Vladimir Putin's point of view there. He used to be Vladimir Putin's spokesperson. Lots of you get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.uk. Dave says the Ukraine situation is very concerning. The international community really needs to get tough on Putin and stop him dictating our terms. Sue says all Labour want to do is focus on this pathetic nonsense around a birthday cake, makes him look stupid when Russia is poised to invade Ukraine. So lots of you being pretty defensive on Boris Johnson. Do get in touch. You can email us any time. OK, well, that is it from me live from Westminster for today. I'm back again at 3 tomorrow. Of course, we'll bring you up to date with the latest when that report is issued from Sue Gray, whether it's the next couple of hours or the next couple of days. Up next, it is Colin Brazier from 4. But first, let's get the weather from the Met Office. See you tomorrow.
Hello again. For most, we've seen a lot of cloud this week, but generally it's looking brighter tomorrow with some sunny spells. Quite a strong wind blowing at first, but that'll ease, and quite mild as well, especially across the south. Low pressure is moving in, but high pressure is still hanging on across the south. These weather fronts bringing some rain to the northwest, but as that low moves close to the far north of Shetlands, we are going to see some very strong winds across northern Scotland overnight. Blustery and damp through Northern Ireland, central Scotland, Northern Ireland. But across Orkney in particular and parts of the north of the mainland, those winds could reach 70 to 75 miles an hour. There is a Met Office yellow warning in place. Further south, well, the breeze picks up, it stays quite cloudy and most of us will be frost-free, but not completely rain-free in the morning. Quite dull and damp across Wales, particularly Cardiff, Swansea, and there'll be some patchy rain trickling into southwest England. Not much rain further east. There will be showers coming into the northeast of Scotland, a bit wintry over the hills, and still very windy here in the morning, but the wind's steadily easing down and the breeze easing down elsewhere. So with the sunny spells that most of us will see, feeling quite pleasant with temperatures in the south, 11 or 12 Celsius, Glasgow 9, Belfast 9 or 10 as well. Feeling colder in the wind in the northeast, which will still bring a few showers here during Thursday evening, but for most it'll be light winds on Thursday night, leading into quite a cold start on Friday morning. More likely to see pockets of frost around to begin with on Friday, but we're also going to see some fine sunny weather again on Friday morning before things steadily cloud over from the west. Again, there'll be some rain at times across northern and western Scotland, and we could see a little bit for Northern Ireland, northwest England and Wales come the end of the day. But it looks fairly light and patchy. East Anglia, southeast England hanging on to the brightness, but definitely more changeable in the outlook, and there is the possibility of some wet and windy weather on Sunday.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hi there, good afternoon. Welcome to Brazier. The stories that matter to you this hour.